Exodus story is at the very heart of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. For thousands of years, believers have treated it as historical fact. But in the past few decades, scholars have called the story a fairy tale. I'm James Cameron, and I know a filmmaker who for nearly a decade has been on a mission to answer a 3,000-year-old question. Is the Exodus fact or fiction? His name is Simcha Jakobovich, and he's a two-time Emmy winner in investigative journalism. He claims that scholars have missed the archaeological evidence that's hiding in plain sight.
It took place in 1947 when archaeologist Henri Chevrier found pieces of a broken stone monument, or stela, dating to a pharaoh named Ahmose, around 1500 before the Common Era, or BCE. Incredibly, the Ahmose stela is covered in hieroglyphic inscriptions that mirror the biblical tale.
So using Chevrier's published description, we reconstructed the stela and got one of the world's leading Egyptologists to comment on it.
We have this very interesting stela, which is dated to the reign of Ahmose. It records a tremendous catastrophe that happened to Egypt. We're not quite clear what it was, but it involved rain and thunder and lightning and such a storm that rarely happens in northeast Africa. I mean, that's a dry area. It sounds peculiar to me that the biblical tradition preserves the memory of plagues, which involve climatic cataclysms. And here we have, from the very time, this curious stela.
This curious stela may in fact hold the key to the Exodus enigma. Let's take a closer look. The Bible says that at the time of the Exodus, there was a great storm. Ahmose's stela also talks of a great storm. The Bible says darkness descended on Egypt. The stela says that Egypt was enveloped in darkness. The stela then says something very peculiar. Though the Egyptians worshipped many gods, on this stela it is written that the storm and the darkness happened when God, in the singular, manifested his power.
The Bible describes Pharaoh, but never names him. Because of this stela, we now know his name, Ahmose.
Here is the man who confronted Moses. Can it be that Ahmose's father remembered the Israelite prince he grew up with, and when he gave his son his Egyptian name, Ahmose, the moon is born, he chose the name because of a play on words. In Hebrew, Ahmose means the brother of Moses. In history, Pharaoh Ahmose is most famous for expelling a foreign nation from Egypt around 1500 BCE. At the time, Egypt was ruled by a people that the ancients called Hyksos. Egyptian history clearly states that the Hyksos who ruled mighty Avaris were Semites like the Israelites, and that they left on a mass exodus, known as the Hyksos expulsion.
We have in the Bible the story of the Semites leaving Egypt and going eastward from Egypt. At the same time, independent of the Bible, we have a story of the Hyksos being expelled from Egypt. I think definitely the two stories are related. They're describing the same event from different viewpoints.
Currently, most scholars date the Exodus to 1270 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II. But some scholars are now breaking with that consensus.
The Bible gives information that would put the Exodus about 480 years before the early years of Solomon, in the middle of the 15th century BC.
Professor Bimson's calculations move the Exodus from its present date to 1470 BCE, less than 100 years from the traditional date for the Hyksos expulsion. These are too close to write off as a coincidence, so we have a new date for the Exodus, approximately 1500 BCE.
The Hyksos. And the Hyksos expulsion is what we're talking about when we are talking about the Exodus.
All right. Our new date for the Exodus is 1500 BCE.
And we know from the Bible that the Israelites arrived in Egypt some 200 years before their Exodus. In the original Hebrew, the Bible calls the Israelites God's people, or Amo Israel. If we write about our dates, there should be hard archaeological evidence for the arrival of these Amo around 1700 BCE. "400 kilometers south of Avaris is the tomb at Beni Hassan. It dates to 1700 BCE. Because no one has looked for evidence of the Exodus in this period, the tomb has never been linked to the biblical story. And yet, there is a perfectly preserved wall painting here that records an ancient migration into Egypt from the area of modern Israel. As in the Bible, the scene involves bearded Semites riding donkeys and bringing their families and flocks into Egypt. Like the biblical Israelites, they are wearing multicolored tunics. The hieroglyphic inscription on this wall calls these people the Amo, God's people. Looking in the right place, during the right time, we are the first to recognize a veritable snapshot of the migration of the biblical Israelites to Egypt. The Bible records that at the time of their arrival, one Israelite rose to the highest levels of Egyptian power. His name was Joseph, son of Yaakov, Jacob in English, and he became so powerful that he wore on his finger the seal of royal authority. Discovering Joseph's seal at Avaris would prove that the Israelites arrived here exactly when our timeline predicts. Incredibly, the tiny seal was found, precisely at the archaeological layer we anticipated. In fact, Professor Manfred Bitak found no less than 9 seals worn by Joseph's court officials. Inscribed right on them is the Hebrew name Yaakov, Joseph's father.
It's very strange that we found 9 seals with the name Jacob here. It's a biblical name, by the way. The original was probably mounted on a ring worn on the finger, and this gives us a new puzzle.
Is it really a puzzle? Not if one uses our chronology. This is the only time that a Hebrew name appears on an Egyptian royal seal. It directly connects Avaris with the Bible. Now that we found hard evidence for the arrival of the Israelites in Egypt and their rise to power, we went searching for archaeological proof of their downfall and the slavery that led to the Exodus.